depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the PASS Business Analytics Marathon. We're so happy to have you joining us today for our panel discussion, What's Next for Business Analytics in the 21st Century. My name is Denise Mcinerney. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for PASS, and I'm also a data architect, so I'm very involved in the data space, and I'm really excited to hear what our panelists have to say today. I have a couple of quick intro slides, and then we will get right into the discussion. So first, a little technical assistance. We have if you have questions or you're having problems, you can raise your hand or ask a question in the question box. You can see where you maximize your screen there. And then also, if you have questions for the panelists, we do want to try to make time to get to those, so you can type those in the question box, and as time permits, we'll read those to the panelists. Now, this event today, these 6 back-to-back live webinars, could not be possible without the support of our partners. And we want to really enthusiastically thank Microsoft and Hortonworks for sponsoring this event today. And I encourage you to check out their offerings that are relevant to the analytics space. All right. So we have an esteemed panel today with us. First, we have Hyoun Park. He's the Chief Research Officer at Blue Hill Research. He oversees research operations day-to-day, delivery methodology. He's also a top 10 big data analytics and mobility influencer. And he is giving a session at the PASS Business Analytics Conference. It's called the Data Supply Chain, Maximizing Value Throughout the Cycle. We also have Miguel Martinez. Miguel is a product marketing manager for Power BI at Microsoft. Prior to joining Microsoft, he was at Amazon, and he holds an MBA from the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business with a focus on marketing and management of technology. And last but certainly not least, we have Jen Stirrup. Jen Stirrup is a Passion Award winner recipient, and she's a SQL Server MVP. She serves on the PASS Board of Directors with me as a director at large. But she's also a very well-known BI and data visualization expert. She's an author, she's a blogger, she's a data strategist, a technical community advocate. Honestly, she contributes so much to this space and this community. It's great. And she's also one of the world's top 100 global influential tweeters on big data topics. She is also presenting at the Business Analytics Conference. Her session is called Pulling Back the Green Curtain, Data Forensics, Power BI, and Data Viz. So welcome, Hyoun, Miguel, and Jen. We're so happy to have you here today. Now, we're going to hear a lot from them, but if you want to reach them after the session, here are their Twitter handles, and we encourage you to reach out, ask questions, connect with them on Twitter, and follow and learn more about them in the days and weeks to come. Now, I've mentioned the PASS Business Analytics Conference a couple of times. That conference is coming up in April 20th through the 22nd in Santa Clara, California. And the program for this conference is really designed to follow the journey of the analyst, from finding and integrating the data, understanding it, interpreting it, creating visualizations to tell the story, and then maybe one of the most overlooked but sometimes most important parts is communicating what that data is telling you to your leadership. And then, of course, unlocking the mysteries of big data, because analysts are more and more figuring out how to use this big data thing in doing their work. So we encourage you to check out the conference, look at the programs. You'll meet some of our speakers today, and there's many more on the website you can learn about. And this conference is really designed to give you both practical information you can use when you get back to your desk on Monday morning, and also things to think about for the future, where you might go in your career, what skills you might want to develop further. So we hope you'll join us in April in Santa Clara for the Business Analytics Conference. So today, a preview event for that event, and we're very excited to welcome our panelists. So I am going to stop talking now, except for asking questions, and we will hand it over to Hyoun, Miguel, and Jen. So to begin with, I think I'd just like to go around the panel and have you just give us a brief summary of where you think business analytics and data analytics are today. How close or far are organizations in the journey to create a culture of data?
Right, I can pick that up. This is Jen here. I think there's a real difference between where companies would like to go with their data they really actually are at the minute. So for example, Gartner for the last 4 years have found that CIOs name business intelligence and analytics as their top priority, as the percentage they indicate that tends to rest between 42 and 50% of the CIOs interviewed. So that's a consistent pattern over the last 4 years. But I think when you go to the reality, it's almost as if some of the hype around business analytics seem to have diminished. And it's not because fewer companies are embracing the discipline. Actually, analytics momentum is continuing to expand, and it's moving into the mainstream of business decision making. And I think that's a perspective. We see that happening quite a bit. I think when people use the term big data, it seems to have swamped a lot of the other terminologies. But I think eventually the rubber will hit the road. People will start to look at big data and think, well, actually, what business value does it give us in terms of the analytics that we want to do? So I think this year, 2015, we'll start to see companies starting to consolidate the analytics and realising that it can strengthen their competitive positions within the marketplace, and if they're not doing it, probably their competitors are. So I think that's really the state of analytics as I see it at the moment. There's a disparity between the actuality and where organisations would like to go.
Thanks, Jen. Miguel or Hyoun?
Yep. I actually agree a lot with what Jen said. The fact that we're all meeting here together and talking about it means that we're in a much better place than we were 4 or 5 years ago. But there's a lot to be done there yet. Actually, we did a research study with IDC last year, so how much money was on the table for companies that would embrace data, all the things that we're talking about here, not only big data as a term, but actually analyzing and giving employees the power to analyze that data and do their everyday work or job with it. The number was 1.6 trillion, so yeah, there's a lot to be done. Definitely a lot to be done.
Hyoun?
Yeah, great. And all I would add to that is that in addition to those results, the biggest challenge that I tend to see in business analytics is simply that the end users who are best positioned to actually take advantage of those results still are not educated. This is still challenging. Honestly, it takes, let's just call it 2 to 3 years to really learn how to do really anything. And when you're talking about statistical models, analytics, even business intelligence modeling, understanding what to do with the data warehouse, these are all areas that your typical end user still doesn't really understand. So we've created a lot of value here in the analytics world among BI, predictive, even data warehousing, data structures. But now we need to start pulling that value into the end user world, and that's where the biggest challenge seems to exist at this point as we talk about creating data-driven organizations, data-driven cultures.
So taking off from that, I think you make a really good point that a lot of analytics is still focused on visualizations and maybe more BI type stuff. What do you think are the obstacles to getting those folks that you mentioned who really need more training, more knowledge to that next level? And that's a question for Hyoun or anyone else on the panel who wants to take it up.
I think, like, following up on what Hyoun said, is a lot of it is just the tools. Like if you look at what's hot today and, I don't know, predictive analytics or advanced analytics, people have to write code supposedly. Learning that is very scary, especially for an end user. I think that's the biggest gap today. And of course, the motivation of any end user to just go and do it. So when they see that in a little project or in a little model, like how much value they're going to get from it, that inspiration is going to come. But then you need the tools or you need the training to actually fill the gap.
Jen or Hyoun,
that's very true.
Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think I was reading recently that Gartner forecasts that 21% of companies with an annual turnover of over $250 million, they will start to have chief data or chief digital officers by 2015. So you start to see more of those people appear on the scene. And that's because I believe obviously there's innovation within the data and unlocking the value that we see in the analytics data that's that they have access to. But in order to do that, I think the biggest obstacle is really about the skill set. Future managers must become still skilled in the art and the language of analytics in order to stand out and also to keep up. I think universities are trying to start to keep up, so we've seen more and more people do business analytics, master's degrees in research, and I think reskilling the workforce to keep up with the new language, the new wave of analytics is an obstacle that individuals as well as organisations will need to cope with.
Hyoun, anything to add?
Yeah, just that there's an incredible trend towards self-service tools right now. Just the ability to, just what you're able to download, what you're able to grab on a either freemium or SaaS basis at this point, and immediately put into place is amazing. When I started my career in analytics 15 years ago, you really had to make a big investment in BI and in analytics to be able to really do anything. Nowadays, a couple $1,000s in the right place, and you can do the predictive and BI stuff that you really want, and really empower a data analyst to be able to really do things across the board. So it's really interesting to see how that's changed, and especially in 2015, that combination of SaaS and then now even guided solutions to even tell you what you're trying to do is really helpful.
Great, thank you all. So this is a two-part question. You can answer either or both. What do you think is the most overhyped topic in analytics today, and or what is the most overlooked topic in analytics?
Well, for overhyped, it's hard to not mention big data.
Yes, that's true. I think I'd like to find the person who coined the term big data. I think I know who it was, and I wonder if that was what he envisaged it actually being. Because big data seems to skew people towards thinking about the size. But the more and more I speak to customers, it's more about the shape of the data rather than its size. It's the fact that the data is semi-structured or unstructured, and then it becomes a big data problem because it is not a rectangular shape. So it's no longer in a sort of Excel format where you have rows and columns and it's quite nice and neat. It's this kind of lump of data. And business analysts, I think, need to work out how to analyse and break down this chunk of data, and it's actually quite hard to do. I think you'll see self-service data preparation becoming much more prevalent over the next few years as people suddenly realise that big data isn't full of magic gnomes that will suddenly, structure the data for them and give them lots of insights. It actually requires a lot of skills and the right tools.
I was going to add, very related to big data, Internet of Things. You hear it everywhere, and I haven't seen, it's really hard to see actual solutions or actual applications besides the hype topic. But there's a lot of potential there too, very related to big data also, and unstructured data.
And I think it's really interesting to see how although there's a lot of analytic solutions out there, one of the real challenges is around just cleansing the data. So similar to what Jen said, where it's the shape of the data, it's the quality of the data, and it's garbage in, garbage out, something we learned in the coding world decades ago. But now we're seeing how that's important.
So let's delve in. Sorry, Jen?
Oh, so I was just going to say about the most overlooked thing as well, because I think the overlooked aspect in analytics is actually securing and protecting the data assets. It's the kind of thing that doesn't sound much fun, but actually security and analytics have a curious relationship at the moment, because analytics can help security by identifying things like intrusion detection and working out differential privacy, digital watermarking as well. And because analytics can find security threats, we also need to use security to help analytics as well. So I'm just going to add that that's a sort of overlooked thing in analytics, instability in certain parts of the world. Security of the data is quite vital.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about big data. A few years ago, it was obviously a topic everyone was talking about, but it seemed like not too many companies were really doing very successfully. And I wonder what you're seeing today. Are you seeing more companies figuring out how to use big data effectively in their businesses, or are we still at the sort of figuring it out stage and exploratory stage?
I think it really helps that people have actually figured out what big data is starting to become. So people can actually say there's social media big data, there's manufacturing data. If you're dealing with those historians and other streaming data, you can deal with those network-based logs. People are starting to actually understand that there's various types of big data. Of course, there's text-based big data. And now that we have these categories in place, it becomes a lot easier to figure out how to actually do analytics and get some sort of value out of it. We're not just lumping things into one big pool of big data at this point. We're understanding that there's a big difference between trying to do, say, real-time big data versus very undifferentiated, unstructured data, and we have various types of structure that we're talking about as well. So even not just lumping into structured and unstructured, but talking about what's actually semi-structured versus what's really more like a blob, just a binary piece of data that's out there. So I think that differentiation has really helped in talking about big data and starting to actually get value now that we're, call it 4 or 5 years into
What I see from my end is at least like making the difference between US, Europe, and Asian than where I'm from, which is South America. I think it depends a lot on the industry and the vertical the company is. So for some companies or some industries, it's way more natural to go after big data, especially if they're in IT or software or any of those industries. Like really old industries, I think they're still trying to catch up and trying to figure out where they can use those huge amounts of data. There are different types like services, like you said, on social media. Like there's a lot of potential there, and like companies that are doing that early in the process, they're seeing much more benefits.
It's also interesting when we look at the vendors and what the various vendors see as being big data and other data. So when we look at some vendors like Power BI, for example, say we look at Microsoft and some of the other people in that space, we've got Tableau and ClickView and all sorts of other people doing all sorts of things. And they tend to connect to big data using ODBC drivers. But then when you actually look at the data sources themselves, they're not labelled as big data. So it's almost like we're starting to go down that path of just seeing these as other data sources. And there's also lots of value in the little data as well. So I had one customer who said they had very few Excel spreadsheets hidden all over the organisation. And I found a server that had hundreds of Excel spreadsheets that the business were using, and they kept them out of the IT department. And the reason they did that was just they didn't want their little data taken away from them. So I think we tend to think bigger is better, but actually these little spreadsheets will contain so much information about the business. I'm wondering if we see big data in terms of the data lake, which is a sort of curated source. I think people have got this vision, they're going to have this data lake, have all of these data sources in it, and everything will be fine. But I think organisations tend to have is data puddles. So there's like little bit of data all over the place, and they're usually a bit muddy and a bit small and a bit messy. So when I hear data lake, I think, no, nobody's got a data lake. We've all got data puddles. And some is Excel and some is a bit of Hadoop that some is somewhere. So I think business analysts don't tend to see the distinction of the data sources. They just have problems with getting at their data usually, regardless of the technology and regardless of the size. So we need some way of getting people out of their data puddles.
Thank you. So I see a question from one of the attendees that's sort of relevant to, so we talk about companies and organizations that are trying to use big data, but what about the more old school managers or leadership that really doesn't get the importance of the benefits or why data analytics is important to their futures, to their businesses? What are some of the techniques or arguments one could make to try to move their organizations more in that direction?
I would say the results is always the best route of
So
those. Oh, sorry. So having a small project that actually can show either insights that are very important and new or actual results. That's the best way to get in, I would say. But of course, it's hard to even get resources for that if you have to start something from the ground.
Yeah, I think it's also about having small
I think one of the
results. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just about to say the same thing, that about actionable results, that one of the key problems I think for these operational managers is that they're used to working based on either instinct or their own their own observations over the years. But that's anecdote, that's not data, and the key is trying to bridge that gap between understanding how they learn from anecdote and trying to find data that actually works for them as well. Visualization tends to be a good bridge for that, but also I think although we talk a lot about data storytelling, we're still not very good at it as an industry or as a department, actually telling that story of what is happening within the data to bring that left brain, right brain together, or to bring experience versus data together. We're still, I think, doing a lot of work there because, frankly, people who are good at data aren't necessarily good at telling narratives, and people good at narratives aren't necessarily good at reading or understanding the data. So there's this big bridge that we're just starting to bridge right now with the tools that are both easy enough to see and understand and strong enough to actually collect and use the data that we've
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of industry market research which indicates that organizations who have an analytics strategy outperform companies who don't. So where the leaders are maybe most likely to make decisions based on data, the organizations, some evidence, for example, from organizations like IBM, show that they tend to do better. And in those organizations, 75% of leaders cite growth within the organization is a key source of value that they've gained from analytics. So I think, for example, IBM, who James Cabelius is from, he spoke in the session just before ours, and IBM surveyed 900 business and IT executives from over 70 countries. And they found that the top 19% were identified as substantially outperforming the industry in the market, and that growth was coming from analytics. So I think now we're starting to see more studies which show the benefit and the differences between organizations that do it and the ones that don't. I understand there's always an inclination for people to have a gut reaction when they see data, particularly if the data is something they don't want to see. But I think if you want to be a decision or a data-led organization, then leaders shouldn't be afraid to read and understand what the data actually says. And to be a data-driven leader is within a data-driven organization.
So the other side of the coin is sometimes the IT department's resistance to cutting data loose or letting the users at it. So what sort of what do you see happening there? Do you see changes? Is it slow? Is it rapid? And what do you think are the most effective ways to get through that sort of tension or that inherent conflict around the one version of the truth that IT manages and owns versus the end users having more direct access to the data?
That's a good one. I think I'm going to build on Jen's answer before. The tools today, I mean, being something so important, data security and data management, I think the tools today are making it easier to IT to open the data for everyone to play around with while keeping control of it. Some things will never change, like I don't want to say never, but like that spreadsheet flying around on email, that the 10th email, like it's something completely different to what it was, or it's just totally outdated. Those things are going to be hard to remove, and therefore IT is always going to be worried about it. But I think the tools that we're having, like we're seeing out there in the market today, are actually giving IT a lot of flexibility, which means that end users at the end of the day are going to have more flexibility and more access. Regarding how to convince them, I think like I've always been an advocate of direct conversations. Like you need the data, you go and have that conversation. You don't have to be tough. You just need to say, like, imagine the benefits that we're going to get for the whole business. It's you just make it easier for me to get access to that data. And we're going to have like faster reaction. We're going to have better business opportunities. At the end of the day, we're all going to be happy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would actually be interested in getting Miguel's perspective a little further, given the recent Power BI announcements. I mean, this isn't a product thing, but obviously you guys have made this a freemium. You've been putting streaming data into this. You put a lot of stuff into this that isn't normally in Excel or your normal spreadsheet. And obviously you did it with the goal of giving tools to typical end users. I was wondering if you could maybe go a little more into kind of the mindset of, what you think of in terms of ubiquitous tools, since you're kind of putting one to market right now, and it's obviously one that people at Microsoft end users will be at least looking at.
Yes, I think you got it exactly right. The reason of making it free is basically making it more accessible for end users. Not only analysts, but like think about a non-technical user. Ease of use is something that is huge for us. So even if you upload a spreadsheet and you can just like create a visualization in 5 minutes, not knowing anything about Excel or any other type of analytical tool, that's something big for us. Going back to what we're talking about on this question, the IT side of Power BI keeps being as powerful as it was before when it was tightly together with Office 365. You still have an admin console, you still have a data catalog where people can search the data that they're looking for, while IT keeps control on top of that. So it's like exactly what I was saying before is what we're trying to reproduce on the product, which is we give you access as easy as an online search, as long as the metadata matches your search. And at the same time, if you have access, you can go and visualize that. If you don't, you can request access directly from the tool, either Excel or Power BI. So I think it's always 50-50. It's like you give end users power to access that data and do whatever they want with it, but at the same time you keep the control in IT, not because they need control or because they want it, just because think about how bad it would be if all the data would be out there and anybody could do anything that they wanted with it.
Yeah, I always like the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. And I think with the users, you're trying to make sure that they have power, but with very little responsibility, so they can't do anything that might damage the data. I think as well there'll be more of a mix between IT and the business as we go forward, because at the moment we've got STEM, which is a shorthand for the academic disciplines of science, technology, engineering and mathematics. But I think reading recently we'll start to talk about STEAM, also add in an A for analytics as well. So it'll be all about people who are able to deliver analytics as a discipline, which will underpin other disciplines as well. And they'll have an organic mix of business and technical skills, and they'll be able to balance quantitative analysis capabilities with an understanding of the business requirements, as well as being very creative people with an IT awareness. And I think I'm hoping certainly tools like Power BI will help push the IT versus business thing away and hopefully start to bring organisations to work together. I do have to say sometimes I do see IT departments being extremely innovative with the data that they have, and sometimes they just, the value needs to be shown to the business, and kind of who produces that value in some ways doesn't matter. But I think probably the best thing is that sort of mix of skills, that analytics, organic skill set that we're starting to see, I think. Everything from IT right through to telling a story with the data.
Yeah, and I think there's still a big gap in aligning analytics and actual vertical use cases. I think we're doing a really good job as a market of getting out tools that end users can start using to solve their analytic problems, but there's still this gap of actually having end users understand which tools are the best ones to use. Do I really need something that's predictive and forecasting and really getting you to telling you what's going to happen in 2017, modeling, all of that stuff, versus sometimes you just need some basic visualizations that are showing you what's happening right now. And I think there's still a fair amount of distance between getting your typical business end user to the actual tools that they're looking for. So I think although the self-service tools and end user based tools are going to become even more available in 2015, I think there's going to still be a lot of opportunity for that business process mapping and that end user business analyst community to really get more value out of the basic tools that are coming up.
So continuing on this theme for, I think, one more question, and again, sort of two parts. What advice would you give someone who's been a sort of a traditional BI professional about where they should be thinking about going next in their career? And a broader question is, what sorts of new roles do you think this emphasis on analytics is going to spawn in organizations?
I will let you start.
Sure, so I'll start.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll start. Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think what's missing in this piece is a knowledge of statistics. So if I start to talk about R in a session, for example, I can see people thinking, oh gosh, I don't remember what the mean is or the median. And I end up having to tone it down a level because I recognise that people haven't looked at statistics since they left school. So I think if someone's in BI and they just, I think first of all need a curiosity of what the data actually says. And then they need to prove what the data says itself. So I think that would be a key skill to try and it's not that they stop being a BI professional, they're just adding more arrows to their quiver, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the great thing about being in BI right now is that there are many different directions that you can potentially go. If you're a traditional data warehousing BI person, you can either start going in that statistical direction, the mathematical direction, as Jen suggested. You can start getting more technical. You can learn Hadoop. You can start becoming a big data expert. You can start, or you can start thinking about the operational aspects of Internet of Things, streaming data, which is just going to get crazier and crazier as Internet of Things, wearables, mobility keep getting used for more and more things. Or you can even go in an artistic direction, thinking about visualization, where there's a lot being done with visualization applications that you're seeing things like data journalism, of course, sites like 538, Nate Silver coming into play. So there's a lot of different directions depending on where you're really feeling like you want to go in the next 10 years of your career. And honestly, I don't think core BI is going anywhere either. People aren't going to just start giving up their traditional enterprise data environments either. So there's a lot of different ways to go. I think it's a super exciting time to be in BI and analytics because there's just so many different things that are happening simultaneously in our market, in our...
Yeah, I think that was an amazing summary. I would like to highlight again that I think BI is not going anywhere. So even if people decided not to specialize or not to dig any further into any of the topics that Hyoun mentioned, there's still a lot to be done. And the only one I would add is it's very general. It's not only for BI, but in like anyone working with data. The track on the conference about communicate and lead and like storytelling. That's something that anyone working with data needs to crack. Like keep going and going and going after that, because it's like none of the things that we mentioned before. Maybe visualization is part of the storytelling part. Would be valuable if you're not able to communicate the story that you're driving people to the data, or just make that discover process easy for everyone. I think that's a key skill that anyone needs to have.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take a question from one of our attendees. And let's see, with all the fast changes in big data and analytics, how is auditing and transparency in data-driven decisions ensured?
Hello there. That's a great question.
I think that's actually been
Sorry, I think we're talking over one another. You go ahead.
Okay. I think one of although we have great self-service tools for analytics and for BI, I think we're just starting to discover how to do something similar for data governance and data quality. And although we're seeing a couple startups pop up with new tools, things like Paxata and Trifacta, I don't think we've really figured out how to do that yet. So I'm going to go back to a quick story from my past. About 20 years ago, I dropped out of college and started a fantasy baseball website. Back then, fantasy baseball, fantasy sports weren't as popular as they were now. We were actually the first fantasy baseball website. But one of the biggest challenges that we found was simply trying to figure out whether the data and the stats we were using were accurate. And back then, all we could do was basically take down the data by hand, check it by hand, and like double check as human beings, literally, to make sure that we had copied it down from the paper correctly. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten much better in the past 20 years. Unless you're a dev who actually understands data management and data governance, a lot of the business data going out there is still just being double checked by normal people. And I think that's a huge gap that we're having to deal with. In addition to that, a couple of years ago when we talked about big data, we were talking about how you didn't have to check the quality of that data because it was just exhausted. It was just things that could be double counted, and it'd work itself out into statistics. And we're finding that's actually not the case. When we clean up this big data, we still need it to be accurate, even if we end up condensing it. It makes it a lot easier to work with. So now that we're actually treating our archival and big data as actual production data, we're finding that the challenges of actually cleaning it up have just gotten worse or bigger, or whatever you want to call it. I think the real key is going to be driving down that responsibility for data quality to more and more people who are closer to the data and actually understand what it means. Currently, that's not really a strategy that exists in organizations. So I think I'm talking about a pie in the sky, what I'd like to see around, rather than what the market is able to.
I think data transparency will become even more important. So I think what will happen is you'll see businesses selling their data or aggregations of their data to other businesses. So it's almost like data will go through a full product life cycle, where it's generated within an organization who then sell aggregations of data. And I think when that happens, their customers, the people receiving the data, will want to understand better how those numbers were created. And then there'll be lots of difficult questions as people start to ask, where did that data come from? How is that aggregated? How do I understand the veracity of that data? So I think data cleansing and the veracity of data will become more important. And even if the internal pressures within the organization don't demand it, you start to see the external pressures on that organization that impinge on it. They will start to ask the questions. We can see people make data mistakes all of the time, and so I would organisations who will run themselves in spreadsheets, but they've never really tried to pick apart those spreadsheets because the Excel in it might be really complex or difficult to understand. So what happens is people don't really understand how the formulas are created, if they're even correct. So I think if an organisation says to me, we don't have any dirty data, my response tends to be, well, you haven't looked hard enough, because I think every organisation will have that as a problem. There's no easy answer except diligence and real business understanding of how that data is generated and what happens to it. And I think actually a lot of companies don't actually know their own data.
Anyone else, anything to add?
Oh, keep going. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. So I want to actually pick up on something Jen just said about mistakes. So, and the complexity, sometimes you don't even realize that there's a mistake in your data. But what about the other side of getting the wrong answer, right? So trying to pick and choose or not using the right techniques to get the truth. What mistakes, or on the other side, what do you think companies should be doing or individuals should be doing to ensure the veracity of their analysis?
I think sometimes it's just as simple as getting someone else to review your work. So when I scope out a project, I always do 50% of the time development and the other 50% of the time is test. People don't often like peer reviews of their work. I'll give you an example. I had one organisation who I went to see them, and the long and short is they were calculating the median incorrectly. They were forgetting to put the numbers into ascending order. So every single time they changed the order of the Excel spreadsheet, the median changed because it was a halfway point in the spreadsheet. And I went back to see them and I said, look, for the median, you need to sort the data in ascending numbers. And I was embarrassed because I thought, I have to check this. That's right. So I actually printed out the formula from Wikipedia to show them. And then they got really embarrassed and I said, well, what's happened to this median? And they said, well, we hand that out to other companies. And I said, okay, you'll have to go back and tell them it's wrong. How long has it been wrong for? And they said, it's probably about 2 years. And I said, well, you need to go back and you're just going to have to, take it on the chin. And they said, well, actually, it's a bit worse than that. I said, okay, hit me with it. And they said, well, we calculated the median 2 years ago, but we actually changed it from an incorrect formula then, and that means we have to go back and see that it's wrong again. So I said, so how long has this median been wrong for? And they said, well, actually the last 2 years plus the 2 years before that, we recognised the problem. So altogether it's 4 years, one metric, one really simple calculation, just had been done wrongly. And I think I was just a fresh pair of eyes, I'd only been there for 2 days. Obviously didn't make many fans within the 2 days that I was there by finding and uncovering all this stuff. But if you're a data person, you do go in and you do ask the questions. And I think sometimes it's not just the skill set, it's that just sort of curious energy that says, you know what, I'm just going to double check that. And then soon I think when people saw me coming along the corridor in the organisation, you could just feel a collective rolling of eyes because they knew I'd find something else in the data. But it's all about just being honest. In some ways there's no way to cushion it. You just have to say, look, okay, so we messed up. And here's what to do to change it and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Totally agree with that. And there's no replacement. I mean, even though tools are becoming better in automation and model tests and all of that, there's no better replacement to the human eye or human nose for the smell test. If you look at the tools, I think around there today, especially anything BI, model specific, sharing and collaboration is becoming a key feature within these tools. So you can see the tools also working, like making it easier for end users to like just double check. Even if you're sharing the final version of a dashboard or report, like another pair of eyes will never be like better than anything else. I mean, will always be better than anything else for now, I think.
And I would just add to that that Jen's example is so good, partially because it talks about not just looking at the data associated with your analytics, but also the formulas, the algorithms, the basic assumptions that often don't get checked year after year. So sometimes it's easy to find that something was supposed to be a 7 instead of a 6. It can be much harder to figure out, again, something like a median versus a mean. Oh, that's just... I just don't even know what to do with that other than to just stare at horror. That's so scary. But great examples like that show where data quality is important, not just at the initial primary data, but the assumptions used to actually use the data as
well. Yeah, people don't seem to do any sort of descriptive statistics. So even simple things like what's the minimum number and what's the maximum number. So I did a project a while ago. I was looking at some NHS data, and they just wanted to know the average number of bed days with people who had a condition. So the number was 15. And I thought, well, let's double check that 15. And then I went back to look at the data, and what I realised was the admission date of that patient was actually after the date that they left the hospital, because it was swapped around. So basically that person had been in hospital for minus 185 days, and it just really screwed up your whole average. And I think just people looking at the min and the max, just a thumb in the ear check is just so valuable, because it just means you pick up on simple silly mistakes like that. So of course when they corrected the data, it was no longer 15 days, it was wildly different, just because we weren't getting these crazy results. It's very easily done, it's data quality, just data input was wrong.
So I want to ask about something slightly different, but that we're starting to hear more talk about, and a couple of you alluded to the Internet of Things and more data collection. So along with that, there's going to be more open data sources, right? Public data, social media data, just all sorts of data that's available out there. So what do you think, if you were going to give a data analyst advice about where they should be looking and how they should be thinking about open data, what would you say?
I think open source is one of these great topics at the moment in Microsoft's acquisition, Evolution Analytics, and they're obviously heavily involved in that. I was really excited by that. I was almost as excited about that as I was some of the new Power BI things, which means just super excited. So I think for business analysts, first of all they need to work out what is the actual business value in adopting the solution. Is it something that's a bit shiny, so people see a new open source word and go squirrel, and off they go and look after it? Or is it just going to add real value to the business? And it's all about evaluating, balancing the risk in the organisation over things like support against the benefits. And the benefits, obviously, working out what the software can give you and what you're actually trying to do. You don't want to start off a huge technical project and realise actually it's not giving you any sort of value. And it's about being a leader as well, about adopting data-driven decision making regardless of the technology, and that could include open source as well. I'm so excited about the Evolution Analytics acquisition. I'm really, really happy about that. It's great news.
Yeah, I think the potential for context, adding new context to analytics through open data sources is quite interesting. Everything from government to social media, things that have just not been previously integrated. We're just starting to really understand what to do with geolocational data, much less everything else. So I think the biggest thing to think about with open data is understanding that every department, every analytic decision, every data-driven decision now has additional context that can be pulled into it. relatively easily based on both the data formats and the data sources that are now
Yeah, like building on both answers, and we talked about this before. You can always, especially if it's open source, like open or public data, you can always check how that data was built, what formulas or what models are behind it. So that becomes very important when you're talking about data that comes from outside the organization. And also, I would say, like the richest data that you see out there is still government, so that should give you some sort of confidence. If you start moving outside that circle, I think you need to just be more careful. And also, data markets, I think, are becoming a thing. I don't know how to put it better. That would give more relevance or validity to the data that's out there. If you're paying for a service or for data specifically, that should come with a little bit of quality for sure.
I have a question from an attendee, so I'm going to, it's a little long, so just bear with me for a second as I read it. She says, our company just transitioned to SAP, and we are having a lot of challenges with our data, not only due to lack of accuracy, but also pulling the data is very slow using business objects. The analysts just want to take the data out of SAP and work on it in Excel. What would be the most efficient way to deal with this change of systems in these challenging times?
This is going to sound like a shameless plug, but there's a business objects connector in Power Query, so you can use that. Sorry about that. I think that's all I have to say.
I was actually going to agree with Miguel in bringing that up as a starting point, simply using Power Query, but with the I guess extra step that once you pull that data into Excel, you now have an additional data governance problem, obviously, where you need to somehow figure out how to track all those individualized changes and make sure that you don't actually get inconsistencies with what's in SAP, because for better or for worse, your company has chosen SAP as its system of record, and you've got to stick with that. So I think that the actual data transfer is fairly simple. The governance challenge is one that you'll have to figure out internally based on what your corporate policies are.
I think it's also about trying to work out what business questions you're going to ask of the data. So, for example, I used to be a business objects consultant, and it's more towards your business puzzles. You get a definition and a distinction between business puzzles and business mysteries. So business puzzles are where you want a defined answer to a very well defined question, and a business mystery is where you don't actually really know the business question and you really don't have a well defined answer. So a puzzle might be how much profit did we make on a particular product over this period of time, and that could be a very structured, very canned report. But then you've got the business mystery where people want to visualise and they don't want to have to define the report in advance. They just want to be given a chunk of data and then play with the data. Because I think when we look at data, the aspect of play is actually very important. People work with the data and they play with it and then they get insight that way. It's not a very structured process. I think business objects answers the business puzzles, but it doesn't actually answer the business mysteries. And I think that's why people tend to try to take the data into Excel, because they have a business mystery. You don't really know what the question is you're trying to answer. It's not a well-defined report, and you don't really know what the answer is. So I think with that, it's about trying to find a middle ground. So I know with Power Query, if you publish, you can publish those queries out using Office 365, and that starts to give you some sort of governance over where the data is going. I think both Excel and particularly Power BI are very good at looking at the business mysteries, as well as giving you some of the puzzles as well. So hopefully you could find the right technology to help you do the right thing. I've seen people use reporting services, and I love reporting services, don't get me wrong, I love it. But they'll try and use reporting services with 20 different filters, because they try and take reporting services and turn it into into a self-service tool, but that's not actually what it's for. You could look at something like Power Pivot as well, get the data across and start to use that. And it's about trying to use the right tool for the right job, and using a hammer when you need a hammer and don't need a spanner. And it sounds like you're just trying, it's a very difficult situation, and I hope that helps a little bit. But if you're trying to use business objects to do business mystery type of insights and results, I think that would be quite hard. And I can totally see why you'd want to put that in Excel.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. Looking at the clock, I think we're about out of time. I want to thank our panelists for the really interesting perspectives they shared with us today, and the attendees for your questions. I do want to add that we have a few more sessions today in this past BA Marathon, and they will all be available recorded if you want to listen to them later also, if you missed the ones earlier today. We also, PASS has a number of free online learning channels. We call them our virtual chapters, and they're subject-based, so you can see we have several in the analytics and BI and big data space, so I'd encourage you to check those out and sign up for the sessions that are interesting to you. And just to remind you all, if you liked what you heard from our panelists today, you can hear more from them in person in Santa Clara in April, along with a number of other experts in analytics and data. So I encourage you to visit the passbaconference.com website and learn more about the event. And with that, again, I want to thank our panelists. It was a great session. I'm sure our attendees got a lot out of it, and we really appreciate you being here. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.